Hello and welcome to another devlog for Peasant Uprise. It's important to evaluate the new features that your game engine of choice offers to make the right decisions for your project. I'll explain what was the goal of this test, what went on for this conversion, as well as the problems I had to face. Finally, I'll end up with my conclusion. Unity introduced some major changes a while back in the rendering system, introducing two additional pipelines: high definition rendering pipeline and lightweight rendering pipeline, on top of their already existing pipeline, which is mostly known as the built-in rendering pipeline. This occurred after I started the project, and for a while these new options spent a good amount of time in preview, which is the term used when a feature is in a working state and not quite production ready. Since then, LWRP was rebranded to Universal Rendering Pipeline, which aims to be the new default rendering system. In this video, I will share my experience with this conversion. HDRP is designed for high-fidelity graphics, but Peasant Uprise is a low polygon game, so I'm really not focusing on realistic graphics, and I want to benefit more from a lightweight solution. So URP seemed like the right choice for me. I don't like to make big changes to my project for no reason, so it was important for me to outline the benefits so I can weigh in the costs. So that's how I started this conversion, very similar to the way I did before. I create a copy of my project, make the conversion, and see what are the gaps for Peasant Uprise during this conversion. The goal is to evaluate whether to move forward with it or to scrap it and then go back to the way it was. There are a few things I knew firsthand, and one is that upon conversion everything is going to turn pink and that I will need to change the terrain shader. Secondly is that custom shaders will need to be converted manually. And finally, that URP and HDRP run on a newer post-processing package. After going through the basic conversion, I noticed that visually it was doing something weird. And as you can see, there are these dark lines in the trees. I didn't know if it was the post-processing or the new rendering system, so I decided to isolate the problem in a second scene. And as you can see, a blanket scene with nothing more than a camera directional light, a plane and a cube with solid colors also showed the same problem. After messing around with the settings, it became apparent that the problem had to do with shadow casting. Changing the depth bias and the normal bias in the URP configuration of shadows solved the problem, but these settings are quite different from what I had before, so I was starting to worry that this would not be as easy as copying values from one project to the other. For best results, I also had to use no cascades. Now going back to my project, I noticed that the rendering problem was solved. However, it led to another problem, which is that now my trees are not casting shadows in the terrain. After more messing around with settings, it seemed like it was due to the no cascades setting. I changed this setting, but while running the game, I noticed some odd behavior, and as you can see, there are parts of the grass which are supposed to be shaded and they are not, creating a kind of glitchy, annoying effect as you move your peasants around. It was also very interesting how the problem only occurred on the game view and not the editor. This is worrisome as you expect the editor to be a realistic representation of what you're going to see in the game. I finally ran into a post in the Unity forum where someone was experiencing the same issue as I was, In short, this ended up being a bug that was reported and fixed in version 7.4.1 of URP, so I ended up having to upgrade to a newer version. After the upgrade and tweaking the shadow settings once again, I was getting closer to what I had before. I started making a quick list of the problems I was encountering, such as clouds were no longer casting shadows on the terrain and that there was no ambient occlusion offering in their new post-processing stack, which makes a huge visual impact. The grass placement also looks different than before. So at this stage I was starting to feel like the upgrade was not going to happen. I didn't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, but I did want to know how far I was from a conversion to the new rendering pipeline. I spent quite a bit of time trying to solve the issue with the clouds, but I was not successful. The problem was not that it wasn't casting shadows anymore, but that it wasn't applying transparency in the cloud's materials, making the shadows too dark. You can see the comparison between the current project and the one I'm testing on. Another unexpected issue is that it looks like the terrain layers are not compatible. The current terrain textures look okay, but if I make any changes on them, they appear completely black. Creating a new layer in URP seems to work fine, but again it doesn't blend with the terrain layers created prior to URP conversion. It was at this stage that I had to sit back and reflect. In conclusion, there are things I anticipated that would need to change, like shaders and the post-processing stack, but I did not anticipate shadows, grass, and terrain layers to behave completely differently. There may be some benefits in performance, but it doesn't seem to impact the FPS count, and this is the main reason for trying this change. But really, the final factor is that the issues with the terrain layers would force me to repaint 15 levels. So unfortunately, I'm going to continue the project with the built-in rendering pipeline. I've already spent a few days testing this transition, and honestly, I cannot afford to go back and have to repaint all the levels. I would also have to make a lot of concessions like removing or migrating particle effects, no cloud shadows, no ambient occlusion, etc. And to be honest, I'm a bit disappointed to have to reach this decision after the effort I've put in, but during this process I've learned quite a bit about URP, the new post-processing package, and the new tools, so it's not all time wasted. At the end of the day, going back to my good project just felt right. Like this is the way I wanted the game to look. It was built on this rendering system, and smashing in a different system just wasn't working. With this test out of the way, I can now take that idea out of my head and focus on completing the rest of the levels. With that said, I'll see you in the next update.